I was in either 7th or 8th grade at the time, living in a small, secluded house in the mountains. It was an evening like any other, or so I thought. My parents were out for the night, playing cards with their friends, part of a regular routine they had. I usually tagged along, but that night, I was getting over a flu bug, too weak to go anywhere. So I stayed behind, stretched out on the living room couch with a book. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. My cat, Whiskers, was draped over the back of a chair, dozing in a patch of sunlight. Julie, our old dog, lay on the rug, soaking up the last of the day's warmth. Before they left, I asked my mom to close the curtains that faced the front yard. The sun was in my eyes, and I didn't have the energy to get up. She did, and I didn't think much of it at the time, but later, it would prove to be a crucial detail. It was still light out when they left, but as the minutes ticked by, the light outside faded, and the house grew dim. I must have dozed off because suddenly, I was jolted awake by an eerie sound. Whiskers was hissing, her fur standing on end, and Julie was growling, a deep, menacing growl I'd never heard from her before. I sat up, disoriented, trying to shake off the sleep. Julie had moved over to the front door, her body stiff, her eyes locked on the doorknob. It was turning slowly, back and forth, as if someone was trying to open it quietly. Panic surged through me. I was alone in the house, and someone was trying to get in. Instinctively, I reached for the phone on the side table, my hand shaking. Before I could dial, I heard footsteps, crunching on the gravel outside. Someone was moving toward the kitchen window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was fully dark now, and with all the curtains open except for the one in front of me, the house was lit up like a stage. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I glanced down and realized I was still in my nightgown, my robe half open, leaving me even more exposed. Thinking fast, I rolled off the couch and flattened myself against it, hiding behind the cedar chest we used as a coffee table. I tucked my legs up, trying to make myself as small as possible, my heart racing. Julie was barking frantically now, her body pressed against the front door, as if trying to keep whoever it was out. But the person outside wasn't going away. I could hear them moving around, the crunch of gravel under their shoes. I had to move. I was too exposed where I was, and the next window would offer a clear view of the living room. I had to get to a safer spot. Keeping low, I crawled along the floor, heading for the phone. As I moved, I realized I was directly under the window where the intruder was standing. I could see his shadow cast on the floor, his form outlined against the faint light outside. I caught a glimpse of him as he moved away from the window, a tall figure, broad shoulders, wearing a heavy jacket. Definitely a man. I reached the phone and lifted the receiver, but there was no dial tone. The line was dead. My heart sank. At the same moment, I heard the back door rattle, the handle being tried. My breath caught in my throat. That door had a glass window. If he broke it, he could reach inside and unlock the door. I had to think fast. My stepdad had a separate phone line installed in his office at the other end of the house. I knew I had to get to it. I scrambled to my feet, feeling lightheaded and weak from the flu, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I ran down the hallway. Julie at my heels, barking and growling. Once in the office, I slammed the door shut and locked it, just in case. I grabbed the phone and dialed the number of the house where my parents were. The phone rang, and I held my breath, praying someone would pick up. When my dad answered, I blurted out everything in a panic, my words tumbling over each other. "Dad, someone's trying to break in. The phone line's dead. I'm alone." For a moment I thought he hadn't heard me, but then he spoke, his voice calm but urgent. "Stay where you are. We're on our way. Lock yourself in a room, and don't open the door for anyone except me or the police." I hung up and crouched down under my stepdad's desk, hiding in the shadows. Julie stood guard in front of me, her growling low and steady. I could hear footsteps outside the office window, moving slowly, deliberately. The intruder was still there, still searching, Minutes felt like hours as I waited, every sound magnified in the darkness. Then, faintly, I heard the sound of a siren in the distance. Relief washed over me, but I didn't move. I stayed hidden, listening as the siren grew louder, closer. The front door burst open, and I heard my dad's voice, followed by the voices of deputies. I stayed where I was until I heard him calling my name. Only then did I crawl out from under the desk, shaking with fear and cold. The deputies searched the house and found the back door's window shattered, blood smeared on the glass where the intruder had cut himself trying to reach the lock. But he hadn't been able to get in. The deadbolt had held. They caught him the next day, at a doctor's office, getting stitches for the cuts on his hand. After that night, I never left the curtains open after dark again. And despite the fear, I stayed home alone again. I refused to let that night make me afraid of my own home. I live in LA, in the suburbs. It's a nice neighborhood, mostly Iranian and Jewish families. Fairly wealthy, but it's not unusual to hear the ghetto bird late at night. Only this night. The airship was right over our house, and the spotlight kept shining back and forth. I had my wife and toddler son asleep in the room with me. Either of them woke up. I thought it might be best to pull the shotgun out of the safe, just to be sure. I grabbed my Remington pump and loaded it with double-aught buck and a slug. I went out to the living room, locking the bedroom door behind me. We have a house lock on the bedroom door. I turned out all the interior lights, and turned on all the exterior lights in the yard. And I just stood there, shirtless in my pajama bottoms with a shotgun in my hands. Occasionally, I'd walk up to the windows on either side of the house. The halo just kept circling, and the spotlight kept darting back and forth. I sat down in a chair, and within a minute, I started to doze off. But then, I saw a figure run by my sliding glass door, from my backyard toward my side yard. I jumped up and ran through the kitchen. My side door to the garage was open. I unlocked the door to the garage and went in, to try and lock the door to the side yard. But he was already there. At the door, turning the knob and pushing. The knob is tricky. Even when it's unlocked, the door itself is swollen from rain exposure and old framing. It's difficult to open. I racked the shotgun, pointed it at the door window, and yelled, "Stop!" I reached forward for the tactical flashlight mounted on the shotgun. But of course, the batteries were dead. I recoiled back toward the water heater, thinking, if he came through that door, I'd have to shoot him. There would be no choice. If I didn't, and he overpowered me, the door behind me was unlocked. He'd have access to the house, and a shotgun. We all think we're going to be heroic, steadfast, resilient in that moment. And I probably would have stood my ground, because I had my wife and son to protect. But the last thing I wanted right then was to pull the trigger and hear the blast, and have a man die violently in my house. What would my life be like? How would it change? Would I have to get lawyers, lose my house, worry about retribution, have to look over my shoulder? I sometimes lay awake at night, thinking of a blunder I said in a conversation, or a mistake I made while driving. Would I relive the moment I killed a guy, over and over again, while trying to sleep? The problem solved itself. The guy stood there, hand on the door, but looking behind him, as the cops rushed up to the side gate. Flashlights. Lots of yelling. 10 different commands, all being screamed at the same time. They reached over, got the gate unlocked, and the guy was on the ground. I put my shotgun down on the other side of the door. A female officer shined her light through the side door window and yelled, "Get inside!" I went back into the kitchen, locked the door behind me. I cracked a beer and took a long plug off a bottle of tequila. They arrested the guy, the helo called off, and after an hour or so, they were all gone. And it was quiet, except for a few neighbors, all kibitzing in Hebrew and Farsi outside. I went outside, locked the gate, and went back to bed, dry mouth and heart racing. My wife woke up finally, asked why I hadn't been sleeping. I'm fine. Just insomnia. I didn't want to tell her. Not at 3 a.m. She'd freak out, and at that moment, that was the last thing I wanted. I called the next day to see if I could get any details. The watch commander told me that the guy was a 16-year-old kid from the neighborhood. Later, I found out he ran around with my neighbor's kids. No previous record, wealthy parents, but got caught breaking into his friend's house, took the cops on a chase, ditched his car a block away, and ran like hell. My yard was probably the darkest and most shaded, so he hid there. I never mentioned the shotgun, or almost killing him. The less they knew, the better, as far as I was concerned. The kid would be a man in his early 30s now. I've never seen him, but the kids he ran with all have kids of their own now, and drive minivans, and have careers, and walk to synagogue on Shabbat. I hope he's doing better. He may or may not know that he was one door's threshold away from a violent and painful death. I want him to know, but I don't want him to know. It was just me and my older sibling at home. A small town in Ohio, the kind of place where there are fewer people than in my mom's graduating class from the city we came from. My sibling was grounded, and both the house phone and their own phone were locked in my dad's gun safe. Either of us had the combination. The reason for the grounding was something silly and arbitrary. I can't quite remember why. Our grandparents lived just down the street. And our great-grandmother? She had her own little house that they built for her on their property. She liked being independent, but they still wanted to be close by. That day, my parents told us they were going to check on her since my grandparents were out of town. They promised they'd be back soon, and we'd order pizza. That sounded good to me, 7 years old and always hungry. My older sibling was about 14 or 15 at the time. We played video games for a while, but after a couple of hours, we started wondering when our parents would be back. Then, there was a knock at the door. I was excited for the food. I ran downstairs, and my sibling followed, saving the game before coming. When I reached the door, I froze. It wasn't my parents standing there. It was a tall, lean man. White guy, with short black hair and scruffy facial hair. He looked around 24 or 25 years old. But the strangest part? I didn't recognize him at all. And in this small town, everyone knew everyone. I held up my finger, signaling, 1 second, and closed the curtain. My sibling had reached the bottom of the stairs, and they were staring at the door with disbelief. They had seen him too. That's when the knocking turned into pounding, and the doorknob began to rattle violently. Terrified, and with no way to call our parents, my sibling grabbed my hand. They pulled me into the kitchen. In a panic, they reached for a knife, but it broke in their hand. They grabbed another, then pulled me into the laundry room. We crouched there, holding each other, my sibling clutching that kitchen knife, their hands trembling. We could hear it. The banging, the pounding, and then, the front door opened. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could barely breathe. My sibling tightened their grip on the knife, ready to defend me. Ready to protect me, like they always had. We held our breath, bracing for the worst. But instead, my mom rounded the corner, holding 2 pizza boxes. She looked confused, wondering why her 2 kids were in a crumpled heap of tears on the floor. We jumped up, running to her, words tumbling out as we tried to explain about the man outside. But she just laughed. My dad was outside talking to him. She said the man was asking about a broken-down car in our driveway, apparently interested in buying it. Said he was a mechanic. My mom felt terrible but also found the whole situation a bit amusing. Apparently, she had gone out and explained to the man, and he said he felt bad for scaring us. We were given hugs and promised that the phones wouldn't be locked away while they were gone again. We spent the evening eating pizza, trying to calm down. But something still bothers me. Even now. even though it didn't seem so strange to me as a child. Why would an adult man pound on the door like that, shake the handle, and try his hardest to get into a house where either the parents weren't home, or the youngest child had just signaled for them to wait? Why would someone come to talk about a car that didn't even have a "for sale" sign on it so late at night? It was 9, maybe 10 p.m. I'd like your opinion on this. Do you think I was actually in danger that night? My parents brushed it off so lightly. But something in my gut, now that I'm an adult, it tells me that's not how adults act. And I don't think I want to know what would have happened if my parents hadn't come home when they did.